air or cheaper cars. The Fuel Emissions Freedom Act says, why not neither? Today on Beyond the Bill Number, we are shifting gears, literally. We're talking about cars, pollution, and a bill that could upend decades of clean air policy. It's called the Fuel Emissions Freedom Act, and despite that oh-so-friendly name, it's got critics revving their engines. Stephen, what is the big picture here?
Yes, well, in short, then, this bill would wipe out all federal and state tailpipe emission standards and fuel economy rules. All of it just
Okay.
gone. Poof. That means no more EPA standards, no more California waiver, and no more corporate average fuel economy or CAFE requirements. Automakers would only have to follow what the market demands, not what regulators require.
Mm. Love that. Love that for my lungs. Love
Yeah,
that for my asthma. I can't help
absolutely.
but start this with wondering what it's like in the UK and your emission
Well,
standards.
we have a long and illustrious history of
Mm,
terrible air in the UK.
yeah.
If you go all the way back to Victorian times, even before that, London was famous. It was renowned for its London smog. Right,
Yes.
so smog was a mixture of fog and coal smoke from all the coal-fired powers, which
Mm,
glom together into this thick brown,
uh,
poisonous, toxic stuff that would sit over London for large periods of time. It's basically London is built in a bowl surrounded by mountains, so bad air just tends to get trapped in there.
yeah,
So
that's
it's
like Denver.
really bad place to
Yeah.
build a city, actually. Yeah. Yeah, a little bit like Denver. So the air can get really, really bad. Now, obviously, thousands and thousands of people died. Like literally, thousands of people would die when these smogs hit. So eventually, we cleaned up the air, and sort of air quality is like one of those strange success stories when it comes to environmental stuff. In that, despite the fact that there's vastly more people, vastly more economic activity, hugely more cars, the air quality is actually just keeps getting better and better and better. So it is quite a good story, but we do risk slipping back and going back to the days of really poor air. And I think that we're only really starting to know now how bad terrible air really is for you. So when I worked at the environment department, we did a lot of work around this, and I was sort of adjacent to a team that were looking at this, and a lot of the work was based around one fact that in 2020, a 9-year-old girl called Ella Kissy Deborah died in London from acute respiratory failure and severe asthma, which happens. But what was important about this was that the in the inquest afterwards, the coroner did rule that air pollution exposure, particularly to nitrogen
Mm,
dioxide and particulate matter, was a major cause of her death. So she was
mm,
the first person in Britain to have died officially as a result of air pollution. And
wow.
really, since then, there's been a lot of work done into this. And what it's starting to show is that bad air is much worse for you than people thought. And it's causing all sorts of problems and huge numbers of deaths that at the moment aren't being attributed to the actual bad air, but are actually really being caused by the pollution in our air. I mean, personally, I think in the next 20, 30 years, air pollution like this will become a bit like smoking was in the 1950s and
Mm-hmm.
60s, where
Mm-hmm.
everyone sort of knew smoking was bad for
Mm-hmm.
you, but people didn't really make the connection that it was as bad as you thought. And a lot of people say, no, actually, smoking's great. It helps aerate your lungs and things, you know. So there are all sorts of nonsense about it. But now we all know that smoking is absolutely terrible and the worst possible thing you do for your health. And I think it will be seen in the future that poor air quality is like this. And then sort of things like the nitrogen dioxide is really bad. But if you live on a main road,
Mm-hmm.
then your chances of actually getting these kinds of sort of acute respiratory problems and sort of dying of it and severe asthma and so on, dramatically higher than if you live even one block in, living along that road and being exposed to the exhaust fumes all the time. So this is it's absolutely crucial, and we can only try and make our cars cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. The idea of rolling back is crazy, and that's why obviously a move to electric cars is such a good thing from a health point of view. You know, you can argue the pros and cons of how environmental sort of electric cars are in terms of emissions and so on, but certainly in terms of air quality and pollution, it's a complete no-brainer because electric cars don't produce any emissions. Whereas even the cleanest car these days is still
Mm-hmm.
producing these emissions.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that's been a topic of conversation in the US too, and especially how our minority communities were kind of put in these areas that are either on main
Mm.
thoroughfares or next to like
Yes,
other
yes,
factories that are making
absolutely.
pollution are dying at a faster rate or
Mm.
having, more lung cancer, like all these different
Mm.
things. And
Yeah.
it is crazy just as a person in the world, sometimes a vehicle will go by and you will just be choking afterwards. And I'm
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
how is that able
And
to
they
be
all used
on
to be like that.
the road?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's notable is you really notice it, don't you? You're driving along and the car in front is, you can see the smoke, and I'm like,
Yes.
oh my God, no, change
Yes.
lane and get around this. Is
Yes.
horrible. Whereas before,
Yes.
all cars were like that, you know? I
Yes.
mean, think back in the 1970s, obviously you had lead in petrol. So lead in
Mm-hmm.
petrol is a really, really interesting story that people realized that actually having lead in your petrol being then pumped out the exhaust pipe was terrible because lead is poisonous, and that
Mm-hmm.
it actually makes kids stupider. And possibly even makes them more violent. And so some
Mm.
people attribute to the sort of the peaks of violent crime and general antisocial behavior in the 1980s. You remember when like cities
Mm.
like New York and so on were these sort of like combat zones almost. The levels of crime and violence were so high. A lot of people attribute that to lead in petrol because when they took lead out of petrol, all that stuff started to come down. It's been falling ever since, in
Wow.
terms of sort of violent crime and sort of general violence. And it happens simultaneously all over the world. Mayors of New York may say, "Oh, is that zero tolerance policy that shaped up New York?" Well, actually, yeah, but what about London and what about Tokyo? What about all these other places where the
Yeah,
same
it's
thing
with the lead
happened?
in the petrol.
The one thing that happened simultaneously around the world was we took lead out of petrol. So, I don't think it's
Wow.
proven, but it's certainly an interesting theory. And certainly lead was terrible. So, yet another sort of positive success story about air pollution. It's one of those rare things where people identify a problem and actually fix it. We got lead out of petrol, and the vast improvements in efficiency in cars over the past 20 or 30 years as well.
Well, back to the topic at hand of making our air
Mm,
less clean.
yes.
Um, let's talk about
So
this bill, which represents a huge shift kind of in the opposite direction of all of the fun and warm feelings we've
it
been
is.
having in our
It is.
opening. How did we
It's
get
quite
to this bill in
staggering.
the first place?
Yeah. Okay, so we've already spoken about a lot of this in the UK, but let's sort of focus just a bit more on the US now. So, with the US, you have to rewind back to 1966 when
Mm-hmm.
California, which was choking on smog and a very similar sort of London type experience there, they created the very first tailpipe limits in the nation. And back in the 70s as well, if you think about California, that's what it was renowned for, wasn't it? It was smog. That's what
Yeah.
LA, it was the smog. That's what people knew it for. And the federal government followed this up in 1970 with the Clean Air Act, which gave the
Mm-hmm.
EPA authority to actually set these national standards. But crucially, California got a special waiver, and it didn't get a waiver so it could, have lower standards. No, it had a waiver so it could have much stricter standards than
Mm.
the federal government was actually setting. And then other states could choose to follow California's lead, as they did. And that weird two-track system actually became the backbone of US auto emissions policy. It's directly led to things like catalytic converters, another like amazing creation that dramatically improved the quality of air. All these cleaner fuels, again, the fuels today are completely unrecognizable from the fuels that we had back in the 70s and 80s. And then all of these efficiency improvements within cars that actually cut smog forming pollution by more than 90%
Wow.
since the 70s. And cars are like 90% more efficient than they were back then in terms of emissions. And the automakers grumbled, and they keep grumbling, they keep moaning about it, but they largely standardized around these California stricter rules.
Mm-hmm.
And so in practice, California then was setting the bar for the whole country. If not, because American cars are such a huge export market as well and make up such a big part of other countries' markets. So, like Ford, for example, every third car on British roads seems to be a Ford. They're hugely popular. So, because of that, they were often setting the bar globally as well as in the United States.
Wow, I love the clean air that I breathe every day, and thank you, California, for your service. Okay, but now we have this Fuel Emissions Freedom Act that would completely dismantle this system.
Yes, exactly. So the Fuel Emissions Freedom Act repeals Section 202 of the Clean Air Act. Very simple, and it voids California's waiver. California no longer gets to set its own standards, and it also blocks other states from setting their own rules and abolishes federal fuel economy standards. So again, we're moving to the system where cars don't have to be fuel efficient. They can be as dirty and as have any kind of mileage that the manufacturer would actually want them to have. So no agency, state or federal, could require cleaner engines or more efficient cars, and that's the bottom line with this bill.
That just, for some reason, doesn't seem like a good idea. Supporters must have some reason for pushing for this. What do they say?
That's true. So, sponsors led by Representative Roger Williams, a bunch of other Texas Republicans, they frame it as deregulation in the name of freedom. They argue that the overlapping federal and California rules creates uncertainty, jacks up compliance costs, and then just gets passed on to consumers. And they're not wrong in a way. It is a weird system. It's just a weird system that seems to work, doesn't it? But it is an odd system. And they say that with no mandates, automakers can plan long term, simplify supply chains, cut the sticker price of cars, better for everyone. Everyone gets sort of cheaper cars, and if the manufacturers want to, then they can make their cars efficient. They just wouldn't be required to by government.
It's funny, we're pro patchwork as long as the patchwork results in less regulation everywhere, and we're anti
Yes.
patchwork if it results in more regulation in one place.
Well, yeah, so it's hypocrisy going both ways, isn't it? So, yeah, in this case, we're supporting a patchwork rather than a universal standards. But there's a slight difference here because we're not saying there should be one standard. What the Republicans are saying here is there should be no standard. So they are just completely removing all standards. So surely a patchwork might not be perfect. Perhaps a patchwork is better than nothing at all.
Well, so then what are the critics saying?
Well, there are some, as you might expect, and they argue that the standards have actually been the main driver of innovation. So there's all the clean air arguments that we've had, and the improvements in clean air, and the fact that air still, while it's a lot cleaner, isn't anywhere near clean enough. A lot of people are still dying from poor air. So there's all those arguments that you might understand. But also, there's this interesting argument that by setting these sort of high standards, you drive innovation. So all of this innovation that's happened in cars, and quite revolutionary stuff actually, to create better mileage and much cleaner engines. And yes, they cost up front, but then they save drivers money at the pump and reduce pollution. So by having a more efficient car, you're saving on the gas, and actually by having better cars, you're saving on repairs. You don't have to replace your car as often, and so on. And that all of this innovation in the automotive section is actually driven by the standards and the regulation. The fear, of course, is that without these rules, automakers won't all arbitrarily decide that they're going to have super efficient cars and super clean cars. They may well cut back on the efficiency and emission controls to get lower production costs. So that would be great for short-term prices. It would be bad for long-term health, of course, and also competitiveness.
Let's talk economics for a second. That kind of seems like the driving factor here. Could this actually hurt the US on a global stage?
Oh, well, yes, it absolutely definitely could. So Europe and China are ratcheting up standards and targeting zero emission vehicles. So it's all about now making your vehicles zero emission, isn't it? So if the US abandoned its rules and then actually started rolling back and having dirtier cars, it risks locking the US auto industry into older technology while other countries sprint ahead. Now, you're already seeing this with electric vehicles, that America, frankly, is falling behind. The
Yeah.
cars coming out of China are so much better. They're a generation ahead of what's being produced, broadly speaking, in the West and certainly in American cars as well. So what's actually needed in the US is a much greater focus on producing this next generation of vehicles. And what this act is risking doing is actually rolling us back to something. Let's go back to having cars like the 1970s. So it could sort of shrink supply chains for advanced vehicles, and it could, of course, make US exports less competitive. And this is a huge export market for the US.
Money matters, but whatever. There's also a health impact here. What do we know about this?
Yes, so we've spoken a lot about this already. Now, this is obviously the crucial element because you're talking about people dying. So, as discussed earlier, vehicle emissions include a whole bag of noxious and toxic chemicals. So you've got the carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, particulates, particularly PM 2.5s, as they're called, which is these very fine particulate matter with where the particles are actually less than 2.5 microns. So they're tiny, tiny little particles, and they get in your lungs and they just sit there. And they cause all sorts of diseases. These contribute to asthma, they contribute to heart disease, and they definitely contribute to premature death. So the EPA has some numbers for the time being, and they estimate that the most recent light duty standards would save up to 2,500 premature deaths per year
Wow.
by 2055. And the American Lung Association projects that moving to 100% zero emission vehicles could prevent 89,000 premature deaths and 2 million asthma attacks by 2050. So undoing these standards then, it doesn't just mean dirtier air, it means more hospital visits, more missed school days, shorter lives, especially for communities living near highways and freight routes. So as well as having this health impact, it has an enormous economic impact as well in terms of having a less healthy populace.
Wow, okay. Well, let's shift again to the states' right argument. We've been talking about that all year. And this is just where things are kind of
It is.
generally ironic, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? We have spoken about a lot of bills where the main argument of them is states' rights. It's about the Conservatives champion these states' rights, saying we need to stop federal overreach, terrible government, small government, let the states decide. But this bill actually flips it on its head. So for
Mm-hmm.
decades, California had a waiver to set stricter standards, and other states could follow. Entirely up to states as to whether they do it, whether they set their standards higher. And the Fuel Emissions Freedom Act would preempt states entirely. It wouldn't just say that they don't have to have their own standard. They would not be allowed to enforce stricter rules, even if
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to, even if it was super popular, even if people in those states actually voted for it. So critics say that that's basically Washington imposing a national policy of no standards. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
really unusual twist, using federal power to block state level protections. Legal scholars note that Congress has the power to preempt, but doing so while abdicating any federal role is, as one analyst put it, comically misaligned with federalism.
And that doesn't even bring the climate question into this.
Yes, yeah, we haven't really spoken about climate yet, but obviously this is a really important element of this. So while the bill really focuses on pollutants that affect health directly, tailpipe standards also reduce greenhouse gases. Pulling back here slows progress towards climate goals and also sends a signal internationally. If the US walks away from regulated emissions, it could embolden other countries to ease up too, which undermines what is a global effort to actually fight climate change.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this is sweeping. What are the chances of this passing?
Well, and that's where this gets a little bit interesting, isn't it? So I remember a while ago we were saying we should focus on bills that are actually serious and have a good chance of passing rather than very performative bills. But here we are again, because this is in a lot of ways a very performative bill. The chance of this
Okay,
passing are
my
close to
heart
zero,
can
really.
slow down a little bit.
A little bit, a little bit. It's not going to pass. Not going to pass. It's still a horrendous piece of legislation, but it's not going to pass. So it's been introduced, HR 4117, to give it its number. It's been referred to a committee and has these three co-sponsors, but there have been no hearings so far, and there's no real signs of any bipartisan support. Certainly not from the Democrats, or even a lot of support more broadly through Republicans as well. And the sponsors really know this, but that's not the point, is it?
Well, then what is the point?
Well, as we've spoken about before, it's all this Overton window stuff, right? It's messaging. It's a
Yeah.
messaging bill. The bill signals to constituents and industry allies we're fighting environmental regulation. Those dastardly Democrats with their environmental legislation, we're sticking it to them. It stakes out this really hardline position. So it therefore builds the political credentials of the Republicans there and their supporters, and could soften the ground for less extreme rollbacks of these regulations in the future. So think of it as planting a flag rather than paving the road.
So, in a nutshell, the Fuel Emissions Act probably won't become law, but it's a clear marker in the larger debate over deregulation, over rolling back these things that are supposed to keep us safe and allow us to have a higher, better quality of life. states' rights, and the clean future for cars.
It is, what's really important about it is the very fact that Republicans would put forward a bill like this as a non-jokey bill. It's like this isn't a joke; they mean it, and it shows how things have moved. How you can actually say we want to do things that are going to kill large numbers of Americans, that are going to destroy our air, that is just going to be terrible for the economy, terrible for the market. But we're doing it because it will actually it will improve our chances of getting re-elected. It will improve the chances of our party, and it will push forward our party's agenda, and which is even a few years ago, you would have never been able to do this, and you can. So it is chilling in that respect. Is why I think we should pay attention to these kind of bills, even when they aren't going to pass.
All for freedom, right? That's why we're here digging into these bills, so you don't have to. That is it for today. Think about your electric car on your way home from work while you're listening to this. Yes. And don't forget to read this blog on BillTrack50.com. Check out Issue Voter and like, subscribe, and share this episode.
Absolutely. Make sure you're breathing clean air. And until next time.